Welcome to another month of Skill Builders. My name is Joanne Knight.
And I'm Joyce Lundrick.
This month on Skill Builders, we're going to work on this really pretty bed runner, and we're going to look at border corner. We thought this was a good opportunity and a good time to be able to talk to you and walk you through the border corner setup. We're going to talk about how to set up a border corner. We're going to talk about the sides and how you quilt the sides in two different ways. One is going to be chunking down the sides of the quilt, and that means that you're going to place bits and pieces of the pattern as you work down the sides of the quilt. The other way that we're going to talk about is how you take the quilt off and turn it and do your side borders that way with version 7, and it's a lot easier to do that. We're going to talk about pattern to boundary a little bit, but we're going to talk about, in this case, when pattern to boundary does not work, and to be able to use repeat patterns with center reference. We're going to go back and do a little bit of review on jump stitch for these patterns that you have in the center right here. And we're also going to do a little bit of blue work on those patterns and then quilt this really pretty crosshatch over the top of them. So it's a really simple pieced bed runner, a really simple pieced pattern, but there's a lot of really big lessons that we're going to go over this month in Skill Builders. When we get through with our stitching, Joyce is going to take over and she's going to show you how you would set up a border corner in standalone mode. And she's also going to show you how to import your patterns into your database for standalone mode. And she's going to go through each one of those. So if you're ready, let's go play. We loaded this quilt on the stitcher vertically because there really wasn't enough room to be able to show you chunking down the sides of the quilt if we had loaded it horizontal the way that you see in the picture. With loading it vertically, we're able to do the top border and then chunk down the sides of this quilt to really give you a true picture of what that takes. So think about your bed runner in this way. This is what it looks like whenever it's loaded vertically. Border corner is going to create a new quilt group for you once you select the border corner pattern and the repeats. Whenever we are doing border corner, it's usually our fashion to quilt the top border first, then quilt the sides if we're going to be chunking down the sides, then quilt whatever is in the center of the quilt. That way we are sure that our sides are nice and straight whenever we are working down that quilt. If we were to quilt the center first, that might have a tendency to push these borders out a little bit or make them wave just a little bit. We're going to run a channel lock with our machine head right along this inside border seam to make sure that it is as straight as we can possibly make it, and then we're going to click out our boundary. The quilt will be basted in as we roll down the quilt. You are always going to choose your corner pattern first, and then you're going to choose your repeats. Our border is 4 inches, and this pattern was designed to fit this corner. One of the really cool things that I like about Creative Studio in version 7 is no longer do you have to tell Creative Studio what the height of these repeats are before you click on border corner. It doesn't make any difference what your pattern height is for your repeat. Creative Studio is going to size that pattern according to the boundary that you click out. So I'm going to select my corner, I'm going to hold down my control key and select my repeat, and I'm going to left click on border corner, and when I do, it's going to give me a new quilt group. In that new quilt group, all of these items in the setup box are grayed out, and they will stay grayed out until I do what it tells me to do on the computer screen. It's going to give me directions in this prompt box on the bottom left. It's going to give me more directions on the CAD screen right in the center. It's also going to suggest to me what I need to do in the upper right of the dialog box. I have a drawing right here to be able to guide me as to where my clicking points will be, and as I click, this gold star will bounce from one point to the next in my clicking motion. I'm only going to get 8 clicks, 4 for the outside portion of the border and 4 for the inside portion of the border. It's important, if you're chunking down the sides, to be able to have a boundary that is going to be tall enough so that you can place side repeats. In order to do that, you need to accurately be able to see your laser light. Make sure that your needle is exactly on your laser light, or either put your needle down really close to where you want to click. You can see that I am placing that laser and that needle right on that corner that I basted in that quilt. Because I used channel lock to baste it in, I know that I have a really accurate corner. So I'm going to click OK on my keypad. I'm going to wait for it to doink. I'm going to go over to the right side. I'm going to be right on that basting line. I'm going to click OK on the keypad. I'm going to come all the way down to the belly bar, which should be at the bottom point of my basting line. Click one time. Go all the way over to the left side. Click one time. And now Creative Studio is going to ask me for the inside. Now this time, whenever I click on the inside, I'm going to click right on that seam line, because Creative Studio defaults to a 1/4 inch. Now if you click the wrong spot, you're done. You have to start over again. So I'm going to be really careful in what I click. Once again, I'm going down to my belly bar. Once I make that last click, Creative Studio will place the top corner patterns, and it will also place the number of repeats that will go within those top corner patterns. Now it wants me to enter in my border length. This particular pieced bed runner is 92 inches, so I'm going to place 92 inches in the length. I'm going to move my mouse over to the screen, and if there is enough room to place at least one pattern in this computer screen on both sides, Creative Studio will place that. If it is not enough room, it will not place any, and you can see that it did not place any. I want to be able to see what the size of those side patterns are that Creative Studio is going to place in there, because that gives me an easier way to chunk those patterns. So what I can do here is I can left click on again, which will keep this quilt group. It will give me another quilt group, and I can click this out again. So I'm going to do that so you can see the difference in the two. I'm going to roll my quilt just a little bit farther up so that I have a little bit more room, because I have a feeling it's really close to placing that in there. I'm going to left click on again. Creative Studio sometimes will ask you to name a quilt group if you have too many border corner quilt groups or too many edge to edge quilt groups in a project. So I'm going to name, and it doesn't really matter what you name it, but I'm going to put top border, and I'm going to say OK. It will now let me click out another boundary to be able to place these patterns after I have rolled that quilt up a little bit. So let's click this out again. Upper left, upper right, down to the belly bar. I always go all the way to the belly bar. Upper left inside. Creative Studio is going to place those patterns again. I'm going to put in that same 92 inches for length, Move my mouse to the screen, and now you can see that it has given me one side pattern on either side. So that's the difference. I have lots of room down here. There must have been just the slightest little bit more boundary that I needed in order to place those patterns. It's going to be important for me to have those side patterns if I'm chunking down the size of the quilt, because Creative Studio is going to take the measurements of the top corner and the measurement of the bottom corner and whatever my length is, and it is going to symmetrically calculate how many patterns I need to be able to go down through this quilt. It does that so that it knows what the size of these side patterns are, because they may be just slightly different than what the top patterns are, and that's why I want Creative Studio to do that for me. Creative Studio also defaults in your margin to 0.25 for a 1/4 inch. We like to use 0.03 because we like to really fill up the corners and the borders as much as we can fill them up, and then that way it gives it a better look. If I'm happy with this setup, and I am, I can left click on OK, and Creative Studio will be ready to quilt those out. While I still have the setup box open, I can go back to my pattern tab. I can search for another pattern, and I can select the corner, and I can select the repeat, and Creative Studio will change those patterns, and it will place those patterns in that same setup. If I choose this Feather It border corner and I hold down the Control key and I select the repeat for it, then you can see that that really squishes that up, because this is an L-shaped corner, but it's an L-shaped corner that is larger than the one that we have for our project. So you can immediately see when you set this up that this pattern is not necessarily a good fit for this quilt, because there's only 20 inches across, and this really squishes this up to be able to place this in here. I'm going to go back to my project. I'm going to once again select my corner, and I'm going to hold down my Control key and select my repeat, and Creative Studio puts those patterns back the way that they need to be. It's very easy to audition quilt patterns while you still have the setup box open. You can see that I have no teal markers in between these repeats. Creative Studio is going to start over here at the left, and it's going to go all the way around, and it's going to quilt to the right side at the bottom. It's not going to jump on any of these patterns because it has no teal markers there. So I'm going to say OK, and if I were chunking down the size of the quilt, this would be ready to quilt out. What we're going to do is chunk down the left side, but on the right side we're going to save that side, and we're going to show you how to turn the quilt and do that. So I'm going to select this one repeat on the right side, and I'm going to delete it. What I have left is the corner. Creative Studio changes the end point to the corner, and it will start on the left side and go all the way around to this right side, and that's where it will stop. One other thing I want to mention to you before I actually start sewing this out, I'm going to change my grid size to 1/4 inch. I had it larger because it was easier for you to see, but I'm going to change that. These patterns look like to me that they sit just a little bit too far off of that line, and you know that we had our margin set at 0.03. This one is a full 1/4 inch. If I go to this side, you can see that it's not a 1/4 inch, a full 1/4 inch. Creative Studio is going to set these patterns in and honor that margin that I put in as close as it can according to the boundaries that I put in. Remember, you only have 8 clicks. It's going to assume that this is a straight line across the top and they are straight lines down the bottom. With border corner, unlike edge to edge mode, you can let Creative Studio set these patterns up for you and make the mathematical calculations for you, And then you can delete these boundaries. Select on the boundary, hit the word delete on your keyboard, select this one, hit the word delete on my keyboard. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to draw an accurate boundary of what my quilt is, and I can make as many clicks as I want to make in order to make those patterns fit and adjust them like I want to. So let me do that, because I don't want that one pattern on the left side sitting 1/4 inch off of that inside seam and the one on the right side sitting closer to that inside seam. So let me click, and it doesn't make any difference where I start my clicking on this, because I'm just going to do an accurate boundary of what I have to work with. Close the drawing from the keypad, exit the drawing from the keypad. Creative Studio keeps that boundary selected, but now I can scroll in and look and see. I'm going to hit the escape key. In looking at this, I can see that this corner on the right side is really close. It's a pretty good 1/4 inch off on the top, off as in away from the boundary, and it's away from the boundary on the left side, but look what's happening on the left side over here. It's kind of going over that boundary, and that's not a good thing. So let me show you how we're going to adjust that. I'm going to select this pattern on the left side, and I'm going to hold down my Alt key, and I am just going to tap my right arrow on my keyboard, and I'm going to move that pattern down. As long as I do it with nudge, I don't run the risk of changing the size or the angle of the pattern. And I'm just looking at this boundary to see where that boundary is right there and where that pattern is going to fit. It's off of my top boundary, and that's what I want it to be, and it's closer to this boundary, this inside boundary. What I have is a jump stitch right here because these patterns are no longer connected. I don't want to mess with this pattern because this is the pattern that I'm going to copy, and I'm going to use it on my chunking going down the side of the quilt. I need it to stay one pattern. What I'm going to do is select the corner, and I'm going to hit F7 on my keyboard, and I'm going to divide this pattern right up at the top of that key, not in the curved part, but in the straight line part, and hit the letter D on the keyboard. When I do that, my snap is on. I have end snap on, so I can take that node, that pink node, hover over it with my mouse, hold down my left mouse key, and it will snap right there to the end of that pattern. Snap is a two-step process. You have to have the snap on either by left clicking on the taskbar or hitting the letter S on your keyboard, and you have to either be in F7, which is nodes, or F11, which is your end handle. I'm going to look at this one. I can live with that right side, This one I want to move down a little bit. I'm going to hold down my Alt key and I am just going to tap my down arrow this time because I want it to move down, and I'm going to select this pattern, which is the corner. I'm going to once again hover over that pink node until it turns to a crosshair and hit the letter D on my keyboard. Select the pattern that is the straight part. Snap is still on. Hover over that pattern and I have that pink dot, which means that it has snapped. I don't see a teal marker, so that means that was done successfully. I'm going to go back to nodes, repeat that same process with this side, hover over that pink node, hold down my left mouse button, and now that pattern has snapped. And when I look at these, that's a much better fit for me. You don't want to divide out this pattern. You don't want to snap this pattern to this corner, because if you do, you have changed the dynamics of that pattern and it may not match up when you are going down the sides. Now that I have these patterns adjusted like I need them to be, you notice that I have no teal markers. Even though I have more patterns on the screen now than I did when I originally set up the border corner, I don't have any teal markers because I snapped these patterns together. So that way they are going to still stitch continuously. It's ready to quilt out. Before I do that, I want to select this pattern on the left side because this is my chunking pattern. And I'm going to go up to my menu strip and I'm going to left click on copy. Control C is your shortcut. Once I have that pattern copied, now I can quilt these patterns out and I'll be ready to roll the quilt and show you how I chunk the sides of the pattern.